We're ready to make a start. Our time has gone, and today's overbrief is an overview of today's business, ministerial briefing on the big conversation, and a departmental briefing on further education. FE means business review. Apologies from the chair, Robin Swan. Any other apologies?
Claire Sugden maybe. Alex Eason's coming late. And David Hilditch.
Okay.
If he comes, he comes.
If we come all right.
Yeah.
Yes, the apologies. On Chairman's business, we're seeking the view of members regarding the sending of Christmas cards on behalf of the committee. The committee usually sends electronic Christmas cards to individuals and organisations that has briefed the committee. Is the committee content with this approach? A list of the recipients are tabled at page 3.
That's for transfer here.
Yeah, and again, since there's no Hansard at the committee today and the minister's coming, can we have that done retrospectively?
Great.
Okay. Page 6, you'll have the draft minutes of the meeting of the 11th of November 2015. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. On the matters rising at page 13, Dale has pointed out that two issues from last week's meeting to do with student finance and the NHS bursary and the impact of immigration rules on attracting people to veterinary positions are for the DHSSPS and for DARD respectively. Our members agreed that we write to these two departments on these particular issues.
Great.
Okay. Correspondence, you'll get them from page 17 of your pack. And can I bring you to page 20, departmental correspondence, providing advance notice that the department will soon publish an action plan for young people with severe learning difficulties who are making the transition from school to adult services.
Just a note, really.
Any members agreed? Not anybody anything to say?
Just wanted to ask how that impacts on the inquiry that we're doing.
Well, it does, because I mean, we might be making recommendations that will be in this action plan.
And obviously they have known that we were doing this inquiry. I can't see I have no difficulty with it as long as it makes life better for people. But in terms of the minister's stuff, but how will it impact?
We'll take it into account when we're writing the report.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Page 45, there's correspondence providing an update on EU matters relating to the department. Again, has members had time to look at that?
This was a written brief. The department had written to us before to say that they hadn't done very much really in Europe matters because we're dealing with the ESF.
Yeah.
So it was a written briefing for now. Normally it would be an oral briefing. My intention is to put it back into the pack. We will be having a briefing from the RAISE researcher on the 2nd of December. So it will be in, and you can ask him questions on it as well when he briefs you then. And if you have any further queries at that stage, we can write back to the department.
Sure.
Okay, members are reading then?
Yeah.
Tabled at page 14, there's correspondence from CCEA inviting the chairperson, deputy chairperson of the committee to visit. Is that open, Cathy, to anybody else?
No,
or just
it was just for the chair and the deputy chair to
the
go down and visit their premises and just to have a chat with the new chief executive, which is Justin Edwards, who used to be deputy chief in Belfast Met.
Fair enough.
Are you content to go? Yes?
Yeah, I'm sure committee happy enough with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Table at page 15, the correspondence from the Committee for Enterprise Trade and Investment requesting that the Minister for Employment and Learning meet informally with both committees to discuss the closure of Michelin in Ballymena. This is an issue obviously that has been to the fore in the last few weeks. What's committee's thinking on that? Committee happy?
Yeah.
Happy enough with the
It'll have to be like a Monday or Tuesday
response that's
probably.
been suggested here?
See if we can find out when the Minister's available and when both committees can actually come together.
Let us know.
Yes.
Okay. And all other actions suggested agreed unless any member has anything to indicate otherwise? No. Okay. At page 61 and tabled at page 68, there's one invitation listed. If members wish to attend any of the events, can you please inform the committee staff to make the necessary arrangements. On the draft work programme tabled at page 60, the revised draft forward work programme until the 9th of December, and other briefings may be scheduled as they arise. And I want you to note some changes within the forward programme. The programme for government briefing has been removed and will take place now after Christmas. The briefing on Dale business plan has been moved from the 2nd of December to the 9th of December. An Assembly research briefing on European issues has been scheduled for the 2nd of December, and briefing on the spending review has been scheduled for the 2nd of December. Although that's still to be confirmed.
Yeah, because research have told us that they will get a paper on the 25th of November, but they don't know what will be in that paper and how detailed it will be, as to whether there's anything in it to even brief the committee on.
Okay.
So let's wait and see.
Yeah,
Phil.
Phil?
Right. Can I just check, is there a meeting next Wednesday or just a visit?
Just a visit.
Yeah. And we'll move on to the ministerial briefing on the big conversation. If he's there.
Yes.
And remind all members to switch off their electronic devices again.
No answer, but we hopefully will get it
I
retrospectively.
know we haven't got it, we'll still have them switched off. And at page 65 and page 120, there's the briefing paper. And I want to welcome the Minister, Dr. Stephen Farry, Miss Ian Kerr, Miss Laura Irvine, and Mr. Alan Russell with us today. Thank you very much for taking the time and coming along to brief the committee on the big conversation. And we'll open it up to you, Minister, and then we will have some questions after that.
Well, thank you very much, Tom, for your welcome, and we're pleased to be here. Been looking forward very much to discussing these important issues with the committee. You're familiar with all of my colleagues, but you know that Shan is now transformed to Shan Kerr, so she's had some interesting developments over the past number of weeks, and so we offer our congratulations to Shan. Obviously, Laura is heading off shortly. Other interesting developments, so we wish her, we give Laura our best wishes in terms of the future, and Alan Russell, Alan's to declare at this stage of it. The primary focus of today is around the big conversation, and this is an opportunity to really hear the views of committee members in terms of the way forward. We want to do this before we finalise and submit a paper to the executive setting out the options in relation to the funding of higher education and some wider issues. But also want to take the opportunity as well, just while we're here focusing on higher education, to touch upon some emerging policy issues which I imagine the committee haven't yet had an opportunity to discuss, but just to put them on your radar, and given that they may be developing at some speed over the coming weeks. And that relates to the publication by the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills in relation to their Green Paper on higher education. Which, while it is strictly speaking applying to England, it has some significant implications across the UK as a whole. In terms of the big conversation itself, you're all very conscious that the status quo in terms of the funding of higher education isn't sustainable any longer. And in some respects, our higher education institutions are blocked in that they are having their funding cut. First of all, in terms of the current in-year budget situation, and on top of that, there's been a structural deficit that has been building up over the previous years. They're also, rightly or wrongly, and no doubt we'll come to this shortly, not able to increase their income through being able to charge higher tuition fees. So we have a structural deficit in terms of the current year's budget of £16 million of cuts, on top of then cuts to the sector that amount to about £39–40 million, and that's essentially the difference in level of funding between Northern Ireland and comparative universities in England. On top of that, of course, there are ambitions to expand the Ulster University at Magee, which in turn brings fresh pressures in terms of recurrent funding. And if you added all of that together, you're looking at a potential pressure in the region of 70 to 80 million pounds per annum, which I suppose in the big scheme of things, given some of the figures that were being bandied around yesterday in terms of the deal, maybe isn't actually that huge, but we'll come to that shortly. In terms of the way forward, there are different scenarios that we could see unfolding for our higher education institutions. Through a lack of strategy around this, we could end up seeing more and more cuts building upon what has happened previously, and that would be a very counterproductive and damaging situation if that did unfold. And if there are further severe cuts to my department in the absence of a plan, that may well be the future that we are looking at. So that is the default assumption at this stage, unless something changes, and that is a very destructive scenario. Equally, we could see a dilution of quality as universities and other higher education institutions try to stretch their budget ever further. And that dilution of quality in terms of what we're doing around investing in the training and education of young people would damage the quality of what they're achieving, and also would not be in the interest of employers and the wider economy. We could see more funding coming from the executive, and there are many models, including close to home, that of Scotland, where additional funding is directed in as a public expenditure priority by governments. We could see a situation where tuition fees are increased beyond the current policy of just inflationary increases, or we could see some slightly different approaches beyond what would be almost a binary choice between more state funding or more tuition fee funding, where we see some degree of planned reduction or rebalancing as to how we do higher skill levels, which would be a planned shrinkage of the higher education size in Northern Ireland. I'm not sure that's particularly somewhere where we want to go, not least because we're looking ahead to more high-level skills, not least in the context of a potential lower level of corporation tax. Or we could see the transformation of the existing level of provision into some sort of hybrid provision around higher level apprenticeships that are provided through part-time degrees. So we could see the same footprint in terms of higher education, but a transformation or a rethink in terms of the balance between what the higher education sector is actually delivering. Obviously, we could see a combination of some of those potential scenarios, though not all. Some are mutually exclusive to each other. You'll also be aware that there's a range of approaches that are adopted close to home in these islands and also elsewhere within Europe and the developed world in terms of how they resource higher education. And in some ways, Northern Ireland sits almost in the middle, where we have a hybrid system in terms of some state funding and some level of tuition fees. Obviously, some countries and regions have much higher dependence upon individual student contributions, whereas other countries have almost entirely state support or very limited tuition fees with a much greater focus on state support. So interested to hear your views on where we go from here in what is likely to be a fairly urgent debate, given that we are likely to see discussions on next year's budget coming to a head very quickly within the executive. In terms of the Green Paper, just to brief you on that, and I mean, we may wish to have a further evidence session around this once the committee have a chance to maybe to consider this. But this does apply primarily in England, but there are knock-on implications for the rest of the UK. I think it's worth referencing that we are seeing some conflicting movements within higher education policy. We're seeing a divergence between what the three Celtic nations are doing under devolution to greater or lesser extents, and what is happening in terms of England, particularly around the policies on fees. But there's other matters in terms of, for example, caps and levels of student numbers, the level of regulation or deregulation of the sector, that we're opening up the sector to alternative providers. So we're seeing a widening divergence on a range of different policies. It's also important to acknowledge that in some areas we do need a common framework around higher education. We're not here as an island in terms of what we're doing. So we're part of bigger networks, and it's important that people are conscious of that. Within this, there's probably 5 elements to be conscious of. One is the creation of a teaching excellence framework, which in some ways is linked to the potential for institutions to charge fees beyond the 9,000 level. That's not where we are in Northern Ireland, clearly, but it does strike us initially as being something that's very bureaucratic for very little return. At the same time, if this becomes an accepted brand for many higher education institutions within the UK, there may be pressure for our own institutions to be part of it. And for that reason, it does make sense for the 3 Celtic nations to try to shape what may be emerging. They're looking to do something in terms of widening participation. In that respect, Northern Ireland has a good story to share with them. They're talking a lot more about deregulation, opening the market to alternative providers. That's not where we are heading in Northern Ireland. They're potentially going to be abolishing HEFCE and replacing it with an office for students, which leaves some unanswered questions around some of the functions that HEFCE provides for ourselves and Wales. And they're looking as well to revamp some of the approach to research funding, particularly changes to the research excellence framework, which while it is bureaucratic to an extent, it does serve a purpose, so we are slightly cautious in that regard. In terms of where this is heading, I've had initial discussions with Joe Johnson, who's the Universities Minister within BIS. We're consulting with local higher education institutions, and we've had some initial discussions with our Scottish and Welsh counterparts, and I'll be talking to them again very shortly. We want to see if we can have a common position between the 3 of us before we then have a quadrilateral with the English Minister or the BIS Minister. And again, we'll be keen to hear your views on that in particular. I appreciate we've just dropped that in today, so I understand that people want to focus their questions on the local funding issues, and once people have a chance to digest the Green Paper, if the committee wants to have a further evidence session, we'll provide that. Equally, if they want to write with any particular points that they want to stress around some of those emerging issues, we're happy to take those into account as we formulate the Northern Ireland response to the current public consultation. Okay, thanks, Chair, and we're happy to pass on the questions.
Minister, and thank you for coming on and giving us that brief today. And there's no question about it. The future of higher and further education is of extreme importance here in Northern Ireland, whenever it comes to inward investment and all them types of issues, and attracting right calibre of people and all. But these HE and FE obviously are businesses in their own right. And given the financial constraints that we are under, what work has been ongoing with the department alongside the colleges and the universities, and getting them to focus on what do we say? Speaking with the small businesses, speaking with the businesses in Northern Ireland, or to get them to have an input into the training and the educating of these young people to the level that they want.
Yes. Well, first of all, we have a higher education strategy, so we are seeking across a whole range of projects to have a much more strategic focus in terms of the higher education sector. Within that, there's a commitment to rebalancing the offer much more towards subjects that are relevant to the economy. We're also developing, and as you know, we launched last week the Skills Barometer, which hopefully will give more accurate labour market information, including at a granular level the destination for people who study particular subjects and the employment levels of people who study particular subjects, again, which is useful in framing both how universities gauge their provision and also how individuals who choose their particular course of study. Outside the context of the traditional academic model, you appreciate we're unfolding our apprenticeship strategy, and there's a focus on the higher level apprenticeships, and indeed there is the potential for those to be delivered at level 6 and beyond, which is university level, and the content of those will be very directly funded and would be very directly informed by employers themselves, and I think that's an area where we're particularly keen to see further developments taking place. Obviously, universities as well need to focus a lot more on employability skills. too. So that, again, that's something that we're trying to develop through the development of the higher education strategy. But there's no doubt about it that universities themselves need to be changed, need to be evolving to ensure that they are keeping up with the labour market. That answer to date covers essentially the issue around the skilling. It's also important to recognise what both our further education colleges and also our universities do in relation to research, innovation and knowledge transfer. In that regard, we have a good story to tell already, and our level of community and business interaction in terms of our local universities is actually shows we're actually punching above our weight. So in terms of our potential share, in terms of the higher education footprint across the UK, we have a disproportionately large or